The house sat at the end of a quiet Midwestern street, the kind where lawns were trimmed evenly and porch lights came on at the same time every evening. Nothing about it stood out. Beige siding, white shutters, a single-car garage. It was the kind of place people described as safe. That's why Mark Harris bought it. He was 32, newly divorced, and desperate for something that felt like a fresh start. The price was suspiciously low, but the inspection came back clean. No structural issues. No water damage. No signs of mold. The realtor explained it away as a motivated seller situation. Someone wanted out fast. The first strange thing happened the day he moved in. As the moving truck pulled away, Mark noticed the neighbors watching. Not openly, no one waved or smiled, but from behind curtains, half-open front doors, and parked cars that lingered too long. When he tried to introduce himself to the woman across the street, she froze the moment he said which house he'd bought. "That one?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Mark said, confused. "Number 214. Her face tightened. She glanced toward his house, then back at him. "Oh," she said. "Well, welcome, I guess." She went back inside without another word. Over the next few days, Mark noticed the same pattern. Polite but distant neighbors. Short conversations that ended abruptly. Awkward silences whenever he mentioned the house. On the fourth day, an older man named Carl from 2 houses down finally said something. "You haven't gone into the basement," Carl said, not phrased as a question. Mark laughed. "Not yet. I've barely unpacked." Carl nodded, relief flickering across his face. "Good," he said. "Best to leave it that way." Mark assumed it was some kind of neighborhood joke. Maybe an old flooding issue. Maybe bad wiring. He didn't push. That night, while unpacking boxes in the kitchen, Mark noticed the basement door. It wasn't unusual at first glance. Solid wood. Freshly painted white. But the lock was wrong. It wasn't a standard knob or deadbolt. It was a heavy steel latch bolted into the frame from the outside, the kind used on storm cellars or storage sheds. It locked from the outside. Mark tried to shake it off. Old owners, old habits. Maybe they had kids. Maybe it was a safety thing. Still, when he tested the handle, it didn't budge. He slept poorly that night. Over the next week, things escalated. Mark began hearing noises after midnight. Not footsteps, something heavier. A slow, dull thud that came from below the house. What? Then again. Sometimes 3 or 4 times in a row. Always from the basement. When he mentioned it to Carl, the man's face went pale. "You didn't open it, did you?" Carl asked. "No," Mark said quickly. "I can't. It's locked." Carl exhaled like he'd been holding his breath. "Good," he said. "If it ever opens, you leave. You understand?" Mark laughed nervously. "What is this? Some kind of prank?" Carl leaned closer. "We all know what's down there," he said. "We just agreed a long time ago not to talk about it." That night, Mark noticed something else. Scratches. Long, thin gouges along the bottom of the basement door. Not deep but numerous. Like fingernails dragged again and again across the wood. The noises grew more deliberate after that. Not thuds anymore. Scraping. Slow, patient scraping as if something was testing the door, learning it. Mark stopped sleeping altogether. He kept the lights on. He drank coffee until his hands shook. He started looking up the house's history online, but records stopped abruptly 15 years earlier. No listings. No photos. Just a gap. Then one morning he found the latch open. The steel bolt was pulled back, resting loosely against the frame. Mark stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at the door. It was ajar just slightly. Enough for darkness to spill out like a stain. He called Carl. No answer. He called the realtor. Straight to voicemail. Against every instinct he had, Mark opened the door. The smell hit first. Damp earth. Rust. Something sour and old. The basement steps descended into darkness, unfinished concrete walls closing in tightly. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, already swaying gently though there was no breeze. At the bottom of the stairs sat a chair. Wooden. Splintered. Facing the steps. There were restraints bolted to the arms. Mark took one step back. Then he heard breathing. Not his. It came from behind the chair. Slow. Controlled. Patient. "Hello?" Mark called, his voice cracking. Something shifted. A shape stood up. It was tall. Too tall for the ceiling, forcing it to hunch. Its skin looked stretched, pale and mottled, like it had never seen sunlight. Its eyes reflected the light wrong, too bright, too alert. It smiled. "You're late," it said. Mark ran. He slammed the door and fled the house barefoot, phone still in his hand. He didn't stop until he reached Carl's house, pounding on the door like his life depended on it. Carl opened the door immediately, like he'd been waiting. "You opened it," Carl said. Mark sobbed. "What is it?" Carl didn't answer. He looked past Mark, toward the house. "It's hungry," Carl said quietly. "And now it knows you." Police were called. They searched the basement. They found nothing. No chair. No restraints. No creature. Just a room with deep grooves carved into the concrete walls, tall enough that something had stood there for a very long time. Mark moved out the next day. The house was sold within a week. New family. New start. The neighbors watched again just like before. And that night, as the new owners unpacked, someone carefully slid the steel latch back into place from the outside. Because everyone on that street knew the basement was locked. They just needed someone who didn't know why. The cul-de-sac didn't look strange at first. It sat just outside a growing Midwestern town, a tight loop of 7 houses tucked away from the main road. Clean sidewalks. Trimmed lawns. White mailboxes with black numbers painted neatly on the side. The kind of place real estate agents described as perfect for families. But locals had a quiet saying about it. People moved in. Then they moved out. Fast. Furniture left behind. Toys abandoned in yards. Cars still in driveways weeks later, slowly collecting dust. No foreclosure signs. No police tape. Just emptiness. Neighbors called it bad luck. Realtors called it coincidence. The town records simply marked the homes as vacated. Then, 3 years ago, the Parker family moved in. James Parker worked construction. His wife, Lila, taught 3rd grade at the elementary school 2 miles away. They had 2 kids, Evan 9 and Rose 6. Normal. Loud. Friendly. Exactly the kind of family that made the cul-de-sac feel alive again. Within the first week, every neighbor had met them. Mrs. Hensley from across the street brought over banana bread and quietly asked how long they planned to stay. "Long time," Lila said with a smile. "We finally found somewhere that feels right." Mrs. Hensley nodded, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. The Parkers noticed things quickly. On moving day, no one helped unload boxes. Curtains twitched, doors cracked open, but no one came outside. At night, porch lights flicked off one by one as soon as the Parkers' lights went on. James joked that the street was full of introverts. The kids noticed something stranger. There were no other children. Not bikes. Not chalk drawings. Not basketball hoops. For a neighborhood designed for families, it was eerily still. The first night, Evan woke up crying. He said he heard footsteps outside his window. James checked the yard. Nothing. No prints. No broken branches. Just the quiet hum of insects and the glow of the street light at the center of the cul-de-sac. The next morning, the Parkers found a note tucked under their front door. No envelope. No name. Just 4 words written in shaky black ink. "Don't stay too long." James laughed it off. Threw it away. Lila didn't. At school, she asked another teacher if she knew anything about their street. The woman hesitated before saying she'd heard stories, but nothing confirmed. Families who left suddenly. That was all. That night, the Parkers hosted a small barbecue, hoping to break the ice. No one came, but they watched. Faces behind curtains. Shadows near doorframes. When James waved, the curtains closed. Later that night, the Parkers' power went out. Not the whole street. Just their house. James stepped outside with a flashlight and noticed something unsettling. Every other home was lit. Porch lights. Living room lamps. TVs flickering behind windows. The entire cul-de-sac was awake. Watching. The breaker box was fine. Power returned on its own minutes later. Over the next week, things escalated. Trash cans were moved overnight. The Parkers' car doors were left unlocked in the morning. Muddy footprints appeared on the back patio. Bare feet, too small to be adult, too large to belong to a child. Rose started talking about a game the street played. She said she saw people standing at the end of her bed at night, whispering. "They ask if we're ready yet," she told her mother. "For what?" Lila asked. Rose shrugged. "To stay." James finally confronted a neighbor, an older man named Carl who lived at the mouth of the cul-de-sac. "Why does everyone act like we don't belong here?" James asked. Carl stared at the Parkers' house for a long time before speaking. "They always think that at first," he said. "Think what?" "That they're different." That night, the Parkers tried to leave. They packed essentials, clothes, documents, the kids' favorite toys. James said they'd stay with Lila's sister until they figured things out. When James started the car, the engine died. So did Lila's. They tried calling for help. No signal. Every phone showed full bars, but no calls went through. Then the streetlights shut off. All at once. The cul-de-sac plunged into darkness, except for one house. The Parkers. Every light inside flicked on. The front door rattled. Not a knock. Something leaning against it. Pressing. Voices rose outside. Soft. Overlapping. Familiar. Neighbors calling their names. "James? Lila? Come outside." Evan peeked through the blinds and screamed. The neighbors stood in a circle around the house, hand in hand, faces blank, mouths moving slightly out of sync with their voices. Some of them were crying. Others were smiling. Carl stood closest, his eyes hollow. "It's time," he said calmly. James grabbed a baseball bat. They stayed inside all night. By morning, the street looked normal again. Sunlight, birds, quiet. The neighbors were gone. Every house empty. Doors unlocked. Beds unmade. Food rotting on kitchen counters. Family photos still on walls. Faces scratched out. The Parkers ran. They didn't stop until they reached the main road. Police searched the cul-de-sac for days. They found no sign of the neighbors. No fingerprints. No records matching their names. No proof they'd ever existed. The Parkers moved away immediately. They changed their last name. They never spoke about it publicly. But 2 months later, a young couple bought a house on that same cul-de-sac. On their first night, they found a note under their door. 4 words. "Don't stay too long." They laughed. A week later, moving trucks appeared. Then disappeared. And once again, the cul-de-sac sat full and empty. Because the last family didn't leave. They stayed. And now, when new families arrive, the neighbors are already waiting. The flyers went up on a Thursday morning. Stapled to telephone poles, taped to gas station doors, slipped under windshields in the grocery store parking lot. They all showed the same 3 faces, 2 men and a teenage girl, smiling, casual photos taken on phones. Beneath them, bold black letters read, "Missing. Last seen near Mill Creek Woods. Volunteers needed." Mill Creek was the kind of rural American town people passed through without stopping. 1 diner. 1 sheriff's office. Miles of farmland pressed up against thick forest that locals treated like a boundary, not a resource. You hunted near it, you fished near it, but you didn't go deep inside. Still, when 3 people vanished within the same week, the town panicked. By Saturday morning, more than 40 volunteers gathered at the edge of the woods. Retirees, college kids home for the summer, church members, even a few out-of-town true crime followers who'd driven in after hearing rumors online. The sheriff stood on the bed of a pickup truck and explained the plan. Grid search. Stay in groups of 4. Mark anything unusual with orange tape. Call it in. Don't wander. What he didn't explain, what he avoided saying outright, was that all 3 missing people had last been seen doing the same thing. They had volunteered to help with a search. The first was a mechanic who joined a search party for a missing hiker months earlier. The second, a high school junior, had helped look for a runaway dog. The third had volunteered with the fire department during a flood rescue 2 years back. No one said it out loud, but the implication hung there, heavy and uncomfortable. By noon, the groups moved into the woods. The forest swallowed sound. Leaves and branches absorbed voices until people spoke in hushed tones without realizing it. Radios crackled with static that never quite resolved into words. The air smelled damp, old, like soil that hadn't seen sunlight in decades. One group, 4 volunteers including a man named Eric, took the northern grid. Eric was quiet, mid-30s, the type who showed up to things out of obligation rather than curiosity. He walked with steady steps, eyes scanning the ground for broken branches, scraps of fabric, anything human. After an hour they found the first thing. An orange ribbon. Not search tape, older. Faded. Brittle. Tied to a tree at eye level. Then another. Then another. They followed them without realizing it, drifting off their assigned grid. Each ribbon led deeper, forming a subtle path that no one questioned because it felt intentional. Helpful. Eventually they came to a clearing. In the center stood a structure made of wood and rusted sheet metal. Not a cabin. Not a shed. Something assembled over time, expanded and repaired with mismatched materials. A door hung crooked on rusted hinges. It wasn't marked on any map. Someone whispered that they should call it in. Before anyone could reach for the radio, the door opened from the inside. A man stepped out. He looked ordinary. Middle-aged. Beard flecked with gray. Dressed in layered clothes like someone used to being outdoors. He raised both hands slowly, palms out. "Thank God," he said. His voice cracked with relief. "I've been trying to flag you people down all morning." The volunteers exchanged looks. He said his name was Paul. Claimed he lived off-grid, that he'd heard people calling through the woods for days. Said he thought they were hunters at first. "You out here alone?" Eric asked. Paul nodded. "Been that way for years." One of the volunteers noticed something behind him, visible through the open doorway. A folding chair. Then another. Then more. Arranged in rows. Paul saw their eyes linger and smiled awkwardly. "I help folks when they get lost," he said. "They come through here sometimes. Sit. Rest. Warm up." "How many?" someone asked. Paul hesitated. "Depends on the year." The radios crackled to life all at once. Not voices. Breathing. Heavy. Uneven. Dozens of overlapping inhales and exhales flooding the channel until someone screamed and dropped theirs into the leaves. From inside the structure came movement. Shuffling. Footsteps. Then people began stepping into the light. Men. Women. Teenagers. All filthy. Sunken-eyed. Thin in a way that suggested time, not hunger alone. They moved slowly, blinking like moles dragged above ground. Eric recognized one of them immediately. It was the mechanic from the flyer. Another volunteer recognized the girl. They were alive. But they didn't react to their names. They didn't speak. They just stood there, eyes unfocused, waiting. Paul cleared his throat. "They get confused," he said softly. "Being found is hard on them." Someone bolted. They didn't get far. More figures emerged from the trees. Not lost hikers, not townspeople, but volunteers from other search groups. People who'd followed the same ribbons. People who'd seen the same helpful markers. The sheriff arrived an hour later with state police. They shut everything down. What they found inside the structure never made the news. Rows of chairs facing a blank wall. Handwritten schedules. Sign-in sheets going back years. Names. Dates. Notes like "arrived willingly" and "stayed after explanation." In a locked room beneath the floorboards, they found video recordings, grainy handheld footage of people sitting in those chairs, being spoken to calmly, patiently. Paul's voice explained the rules. He told them they weren't lost. He told them the town needed them. That every place like Mill Creek survived because some people stayed behind to keep it that way. Most disturbing of all were the interviews. Recordings of missing people, weeks or months after arrival, repeating the same phrases in flat voices. "We volunteered. We were chosen. We help now." Paul was arrested without incident. So were 6 other men and women from the town. The case dragged on quietly, buried under sealed documents and mental health evaluations. The official explanation blamed cult influence, isolation, shared delusion. But that explanation didn't account for everything. Because months later, long after the woods were cleared and the flyers taken down, a new one appeared on a telephone pole near the highway. No faces this time. Just words. Volunteers needed. And beneath it, written in careful handwriting. "They aren't missing. They're waiting." They all remembered the knocking the same way. 3 sharp knocks. Pause. Then 2 more, slower, deliberate. It happened just after midnight in the Jefferson Heights apartments, a 6-story brick building tucked between a laundromat and a closed-down grocery store in Ohio. The kind of place people moved into because rent was cheap and neighbors kept to themselves. The fire started on the 3rd floor. By the time firefighters arrived, smoke had already swallowed the stairwells. 12 people died that night. 19 survived. And every single survivor, when interviewed separately, told investigators about the woman who knocked on their door. She didn't yell. She didn't pound. She didn't beg. She just knocked. Mrs. Evelyn Carter on the 5th floor was awake when it happened. She'd been watching late-night TV, half asleep in her recliner, when she heard the knocking. She opened the door and saw a woman standing in the hallway. Mid-30s, maybe early 40s. Long dark hair pulled back loosely. Wearing a light-colored coat that looked too thin for winter. Her face was calm, strangely calm, despite the faint smell of smoke already creeping through the air. "You need to get out," the woman said quietly. Mrs. Carter asked why. "There's a fire," the woman replied. "It's coming fast." Then she stepped back, turned, and walked down the hallway, knocking on the next door. Mrs. Carter grabbed her coat, her purse, and left. She would later say that if the woman had sounded panicked, she might have brushed it off. But something about how calm she was made it feel urgent. Final. On the 4th floor, a college student named Marcus Reed heard the same knocking while gaming with headphones on. He almost ignored it. When he opened the door, the hallway lights flickered. Smoke hugged the ceiling. The woman stood there, hands folded in front of her. "You don't have much time," she said. Marcus asked if she was calling the fire department. She shook her head once. "Someone already did." Then she moved on. Marcus grabbed his phone and ran. On the 2nd floor, a couple argued about whether the knocking was real. The woman spoke to them through the door at first. "Please," she said. "You need to leave now." Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the argument immediately. They opened the door just as smoke poured from the stairwell at the end of the hall. They followed her down the corridor until she disappeared around the corner. No one thought much about her during the chaos. People coughed. They screamed names. They stumbled down emergency stairs and spilled out into the freezing night, wrapped in blankets, watching flames eat through the windows above. It wasn't until later, after the dead were counted, that the stories started lining up. Fire investigators went door to door, gathering statements. Survivors kept mentioning the woman. At first, it sounded like coincidence. In a crisis, memories blur. Faces blend together. But the details were too similar. Same knocking pattern. Same calm tone. Same words almost exactly. And always the same thing at the end. She never ran. She never followed them outside. She just kept knocking on doors. Investigators assumed she was a resident who hadn't survived. Until they checked the records. No woman matching that description lived in the building. They checked leases. IDs. Driver's licenses recovered from the scene. Nothing. Then came the security footage. The Jefferson Heights had outdated cameras, grainy, black and white, barely functional. One camera covered the 3rd floor hallway, near where the fire started. Footage showed smoke creeping along the ceiling. Doors opening. People running. And then the woman. She walked through the frame slowly, stopping at each door. Knock. Pause. Knock. Her face was visible but blurred. The camera stuttered every time she passed, like it couldn't quite focus on her. At one door she knocked. No one answered. She waited longer that time. Then she knocked again. That apartment belonged to a man named Thomas Avery. Thomas didn't make it out. The footage never showed the woman leaving the hallway. She didn't collapse. She didn't flee from the smoke. She simply faded into it. Firefighters later said the smoke conditions on that floor would have been lethal within minutes. No one could have survived standing there that long. The story might have ended there, chalked up to confusion, trauma, mass hysteria. But then the families of the victims spoke up. Thomas Avery's sister remembered something strange from years earlier. Thomas had lived in Jefferson Heights once before, nearly a decade earlier. Back then there had been another fire. Smaller. Contained to one unit. A woman died in that fire. Her name was Anna Morales. She'd lived on the 3rd floor. Same hallway where the recent fire started. Anna Morales was 38 years old. Long dark hair. Quiet. Known for helping neighbors carry groceries, holding doors open, checking on people when alarms went off. On the night she died, witnesses said she'd been going door to door, warning people about the fire. She never made it out. Her apartment was the point of origin in the old fire. The new fire started in the exact same unit. When investigators pulled the old case file, they found something else. Back then, several survivors had mentioned a woman knocking on their door. Her name wasn't known at the time, because no one asked. The final report listed Anna Morales as the only fatality of that fire. Cause of death: smoke inhalation in the hallway. She'd been found near the stairwell, hand raised, knuckles bruised. Like she'd been knocking. In the weeks after the recent fire, survivors struggled to sleep. Some said they heard knocking in the middle of the night, even after moving into new places. Mrs. Carter woke up one night convinced someone was at her door. When she checked, no one was there. Just the faint smell of smoke. Marcus admitted he couldn't shake the feeling that the woman hadn't been there to save everyone. Only some. Every person who reported seeing her survived. Every apartment she knocked on, but didn't get an answer from, belonged to someone who died. It was as if she was counting. Or choosing. The building was demolished 6 months later. Before it came down, a demolition worker found something carved into the inside of a stairwell wall, hidden behind old paint and soot. 5 words scratched deep enough to bleed rust. I knocked. They didn't. No one knows who carved it. But people in the neighborhood swear that on quiet nights, if you walk past where Jefferson Heights once stood, you can still hear it. 3 sharp knocks. Pause. Then 2 more. And if you ever hear them at your door during a fire, you should open it. They stopped looking for him after the 7th year. Not officially. His name stayed in databases. His photo still lived on a few aging missing persons pages. But emotionally, the family had buried him long before the police ever suggested it. People do that when waiting becomes unbearable. They replace hope with something quieter. Something safer. His name was Aaron Klein. He vanished at 22 after driving out of Ohio for a weekend camping trip in the Appalachian foothills. His truck was found 3 days later, abandoned at a closed trailhead. He's inside. Wallet on the seat. No blood. No signs of a struggle. Just gone. For 12 years there was nothing. No sightings. No remains. No answers. Then, on a cold Tuesday evening in late October, Aaron came home. His younger sister, Marissa, was the one who opened the door. She almost slammed it shut again, thinking her mind was playing a cruel trick. The man standing on the porch looked thin, hollowed out, like someone who'd been sick for a long time, but his face was unmistakable. Same eyes. Same crooked nose from when he broke it in high school. Same scar near the hairline. "Marissa," he said quietly. "I'm sorry it took so long." She screamed. Their parents didn't believe it at first. Their father stood frozen in the hallway, staring like he was looking at a ghost that might vanish if he blinked. Their mother collapsed into sobs before she even reached him, clutching his jacket like she was afraid he'd dissolve. Aaron didn't fight it. He let them hold him. Let them cry. He didn't smile, but he didn't pull away either. He told them he'd been lost. Injured. That he'd wandered off the trail and fallen into a ravine. That he remembered weeks of drifting in and out of consciousness, then years that blurred together in places he couldn't explain very well. He said he'd lived off-grid with people who didn't ask questions. People who didn't use phones. People who didn't exist on maps. Whenever they pressed for details, his answers stayed vague. Not defensive, just empty. Like he didn't have the words. The police were notified, of course. Reports were filed. Photos were taken. But nothing about his return broke any laws, and no evidence contradicted his story. People survive stranger things. What unsettled everyone wasn't where Aaron had been. It was how he was now. He barely slept. When he did, it was during the day, curled up in corners of the house instead of bedrooms. At night, he wandered. Silent footsteps in the hall. Long periods standing still in dark rooms, as if listening to something no one else could hear. He stopped eating meat. Then stopped eating cooked food altogether. He said it felt wrong in his mouth. And he refused to use mirrors. If he accidentally passed one, he'd turn his face away sharply, jaw clenched, breath quickening. Once, Marissa caught him covering the bathroom mirror with a towel, hands shaking as he tied it off. When she asked why, he just said, "It makes it harder for them." That was the first time he used that word. The second time was worse. A week after Aaron returned, the family dog, an old golden retriever that had known Aaron since he was a teenager, began growling whenever Aaron entered a room. Low, panicked growls, teeth bared. The dog would back away, hackles raised, whining like it was cornered. One night, the dog bolted from the house through an open door and was never seen again. Aaron didn't comment on it. But Marissa noticed that after the dog vanished, Aaron slept better. He became calmer. Too calm. He started asking strange questions. Not about friends. Not about what he'd missed. But about the house. Does the basement door still stick? Are the windows in the back still sealed shut? Do you still hear the pipes knock at night, or did that stop? When Marissa asked why he cared, he looked at her for a long moment before saying, "Because it needs places to rest." Her parents laughed it off. Trauma, they said. Survivor's guilt. PTSD. The mind invents things to cope with long-term isolation. But Marissa began noticing things she couldn't explain. Scratches along the inside of the basement door. Deep ones. Like something had tried to claw its way out. Mud tracked across the kitchen floor in the mornings, even though no one remembered going outside. Mud that smelled metallic. And once, very late at night, Marissa woke to hear Aaron whispering in the living room. Not talking. Whispering. Like he was responding to something that spoke first. She stood at the top of the stairs and listened. "I told you," Aaron murmured. "Not yet. They're not ready." Pause. Then, "No. You promised." His voice trembled, but not with fear. With effort. Like he was holding something back. The next morning, their mother was found sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall. She didn't recognize anyone. Didn't respond to her name. Doctors later called it a sudden neurological event. Stress-induced dissociation. Aaron didn't visit her at the hospital. That night, Marissa confronted him. She demanded to know what had happened in the woods 12 years ago. What he'd really found. What he'd brought back with him. For the first time since returning, Aaron cried. He told her that when he fell into the ravine he didn't die, but he should have. He told her the forest wasn't empty. That some places were hollow like caves turned inside out. That something old lived beneath the trails, beneath the roots. He said it found him broken and alone. And it helped him survive. But it didn't do it for free. It learned me, he said quietly. Learned how to wear me. How to follow me home. Marissa asked him where it was now. Aaron looked at the ceiling. Everywhere it can fit, he said. And places it's still growing into. She didn't sleep that night. The next morning the house smelled wrong. Damp. Rotting. The basement door stood open. Aaron was gone. So was her father. They found him 2 days later, miles into the woods behind the neighborhood. Alive but unresponsive. His fingernails torn off. His throat raw as if he'd been screaming for days. He kept repeating the same sentence over and over. He left the door open. Aaron was never seen again. But neighbors began reporting things. Footsteps in crawl spaces. Breathing in walls. Shadows that bent the wrong way. And sometimes, late at night, if someone stands very still in Marissa's house, they can hear whispering from beneath the floorboards. Not in Aaron's voice. But in something that sounds like it learned how to talk, by listening to him first. The town of Briar Hollow didn't appear on most maps. If you were driving through northern Pennsylvania and missed a single turn, you'd end up there by accident. One main road, a handful of diners and storefronts, and rows of houses that all looked like they'd been built in the same decade and never touched again. It was quiet in the way only dying places are quiet. No sirens. No late-night noise complaints. No police blotter worth reading. That was what caught Daniel Cross's attention. Daniel was a freelance journalist who made a living chasing small, forgotten stories, towns poisoned by bad water, sheriff departments that vanished overnight, places where crime statistics didn't add up. Briar Hollow's crime record stood out immediately. 0 homicides in 42 years. Not unsolved. Not cold cases. 0 reported murders. In a country where violence spilled into even the most rural corners, that kind of record wasn't impressive. It was suspicious. Daniel arrived on a gray Tuesday afternoon. The town sign was rusted, the paint peeling so badly the name was barely legible. Beneath it, someone had spray painted a phrase that had been half scrubbed away. "We end it here." The motel clerk barely looked up when Daniel signed the guest book. "You here for work?" the man asked. Daniel nodded. "Just passing through. Thought I'd write something about the town." The clerk's pen froze for a moment. "Nothing to write about here," he said flatly. "People come. People go." Daniel smiled politely. "That's every town." The man didn't smile back. The first thing Daniel noticed was how often death came up in casual conversation. At the diner, an elderly waitress pointed out an empty booth. "Used to be Earl's spot," she said. "He won't be needing it anymore." Daniel asked what happened to Earl. "Same thing that happens to everyone," she replied, refilling his coffee. "Eventually." Later, at a gas station, Daniel overheard a man complaining about his neighbor's dog barking. "Won't be an issue much longer," another man said. Daniel expected a joke. None came. By the third day, Daniel realized something else was missing. There were no police patrols. The station sat at the edge of town, lights off, weeds growing through the parking lot cracks. A single cruiser rusted near the entrance, doors unlocked, radio silent. When Daniel asked about it, locals shrugged. "Sheriff retired," someone said. "Didn't need a replacement," said another. That night, Daniel reviewed public records. Death certificates were filed regularly. Causes varied: heart failure, accidents, illness. But none were investigated. No autopsies. No follow-ups. And none were reported as suspicious. On his fourth night, Daniel finally saw a body. It was just after midnight when he heard voices outside his motel room. Not shouting, murmuring. "Come." Almost gentle. He peeked through the curtain. 3 people stood near the edge of the road. A woman lay on the ground between them, her face turned away, hair matted with dark blood. One of the men knelt beside her and checked her wrist. "She's done," he said softly. Another nodded. "Call it in?" The first man shook his head. "No need." They lifted her with practiced ease and carried her toward a pickup truck parked without headlights. Daniel stepped outside before he could stop himself. "Hey," he called. "You should call the police." The men froze. Slowly they turned toward him. Their expressions weren't angry. They were confused. "Police?" one of them asked, like he hadn't heard the word in years. "She fell," Daniel said. "She's hurt, she could still be alive." The man holding her feet looked down at her face. "She's not hurt," he said gently. "She's finished." "Finished with what?" Daniel snapped. The tallest man sighed, like a teacher dealing with a stubborn child. "Look," he said, "go back inside. You're not from here." "That's exactly why I'm saying something," Daniel replied. "This isn't normal." The men exchanged glances. "Normal for you," one said. "Not for us." They loaded the woman into the truck and drove away, leaving behind a dark stain that soaked into the pavement. Daniel didn't sleep. The next morning he demanded answers. At the diner he asked about the woman. The waitress didn't look surprised. "Oh," she said. "That was Lorna. She died last night," Daniel said. The waitress nodded. "She'd been ready for a while." "Ready for what?" The waitress leaned closer, lowering her voice. "For the ending." Daniel pushed harder. He spoke to shop owners, neighbors, church members. Every conversation followed the same pattern: evasion, then mild concern, then quiet irritation. Finally, an older man named Walter agreed to talk. Walter lived alone at the edge of town, surrounded by pine trees that blocked out most of the daylight. He let Daniel inside and poured 2 glasses of cheap whiskey. "You want to know why we don't call the police?" Walter said. "It's because nothing illegal is happening." Daniel stared at him. "People are dying." Walter nodded. "They always do." "Violently," Daniel said. "Unexpectedly." Walter's mouth tightened. "Son," he said, "nothing about it is unexpected." He explained that Briar Hollow had been founded around a factory that closed decades ago. Jobs vanished. People stayed. And slowly something changed. People began having feelings. Not sadness. Not depression. Certainty. They'd wake up one day, Walter said, and know, not guess, no, that their time was coming. Some tried to leave town. They never made it far. Car accidents. Heart attacks. Disappearances in the woods. It's like the town doesn't let you die anywhere else, Walter said. You finish where you started. So you just help? Daniel asked. Walter met his eyes. We make sure it's quick. Daniel left Walter's house shaking. That night he tried to leave Briar Hollow. His car died halfway down the main road. No warning. No lights. No engine. His phone had no signal. When he stepped out of the car, someone was already waiting. It was the motel clerk. You shouldn't fight it, the man said. Daniel backed away. Fight what? The clerk smiled sadly. You've been here long enough, he said. You feel it, don't you? Daniel felt something then, a pressure behind his eyes, a weight in his chest. A quiet understanding that terrified him more than panic ever could. How long? Daniel whispered. The clerk checked his watch. Tonight, he said. Maybe tomorrow. Daniel ran. They found him at dawn, collapsed near the edge of town, breath shallow, eyes unfocused. No ambulance was called. No report was filed. By sunset, Daniel Cross was officially listed as deceased, 'cause natural. His article was never published. And in Briar Hollow, the number of reported murders remained exactly the same. 0. The bus was found just after sunrise, parked crookedly on the shoulder of a two-lane highway outside a small town in Missouri. It was the kind of road locals barely noticed anymore. Cornfields on both sides, a rusted speed limit sign, and no businesses for miles. A state trooper spotted it first. The engine was cold. The door was open. And every seat was filled. There were 42 children sitting inside the bus, all facing forward, all silent. None of them were crying. None of them were restrained. Their hands rested neatly in their laps, their feet barely touching the floor. Most looked between 6 and 10 years old. At first, the trooper thought it was a field trip gone wrong. Maybe the driver had wandered off for help. Maybe the kids were scared into silence. But when he climbed the steps and spoke to them, not a single child responded. They just stared. Backup arrived within minutes. Then an ambulance. Then another patrol car. The bus was searched front to back. No driver. No lunch boxes. No backpacks. No emergency contact list clipped to the dashboard. No identifying marks at all. One officer finally asked the question everyone was thinking. Which school is missing a bus? Dispatch didn't have an answer. The town's police department started calling nearby districts. Public schools, private schools, even summer camps. Nothing matched. No bus had been reported overdue. No children were unaccounted for. Still, they assumed the calls would start coming in soon. Panicked parents. Angry administrators. They didn't. The children were escorted off the bus one by one. They walked obediently, never resisting, never asking where they were going. Their shoes were clean. Their clothes were plain, jeans, sweaters, jackets, but none of the tags had brand names. Some of the clothes didn't even have seams where they should have been. A paramedic crouched down to speak to one little girl with brown hair and a faint bruise on her cheek. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl blinked once. Nothing else. At the temporary triage center, doctors ran basic checks. All 42 children were healthy. No signs of malnutrition. No drugs in their systems. Heartbeat steady. Temperatures normal. But none of them spoke. Not to doctors. Not to social workers. Not to police. By midday the story leaked. News vans lined the road where the bus had been found. Headlines spread fast. Bus full of silent children discovered. People across the country waited for the obvious follow-up. The missing persons reports never came. By the second day, federal agencies stepped in. Fingerprints were taken. DNA samples collected. Facial recognition run through every database available. The results came back empty. It wasn't that the children didn't match missing kids. It was worse. They didn't match anyone. No birth certificates. No hospital records. No school enrollment. No vaccination history. No family trees. It was as if 42 children had appeared fully formed with no past. That was when the questions became uncomfortable. One investigator suggested human trafficking. Another suggested an illegal commune. Someone else whispered the word cult, then stopped talking when others turned to look at him. They began interviewing residents near where the bus was found. An old farmer across the road said he'd seen the bus parked there before. More than once. How long? An agent asked. The man shrugged. Years maybe. Always late at night. Always gone by morning. Another woman remembered hearing children singing once. Not normal songs. Nursery rhymes but slowed down. Stretched. Like they didn't quite understand the words. When investigators went back to examine the bus more closely, they noticed something else. There was no license plate. No VIN number. The paint color didn't match any manufacturer's records. Even the seats were wrong. Slightly narrower than standard, with metal frames that didn't align with any known bus design. One technician finally said it out loud. This thing wasn't made to be driven far. Inside the bus, faint markings were found scratched beneath the seats. Symbols, lines, repeated shapes. Some looked like tally marks. Others looked like attempts at letters that never quite formed. Under the very last seat, someone found a name carved deep into the metal. Not a child's name. A town's name. A town that no longer existed. The town had been abandoned decades earlier after a factory fire poisoned the water supply. Families left. Records were sealed after several unexplained deaths. Most people forgot it ever existed. Except it hadn't been empty when it disappeared. That night, one of the children finally spoke. He was the smallest boy in the group. Blonde hair. A loose tooth. He tugged at a nurse's sleeve and whispered something so softly she made him repeat it twice. Are we early this time? The room went quiet. Early for what? The nurse asked. For the counting, the boy said. Before anyone could ask more, he clamped his mouth shut and refused to speak again. Over the next few days, small things started happening. Security cameras malfunctioned whenever the children were moved. Lights flickered when they were nearby. 2 social workers quit without explanation. One investigator requested a transfer after waking up to muddy footprints outside his motel door. Children's footprints, all facing inward. The bus itself vanished on the 4th night. No alarms went off. No cameras caught it leaving. It was simply gone from the secured lot. That should have been impossible. Then one of the children disappeared. A girl 8 years old was tucked into her cot at midnight. By morning, the bed was empty. No struggle. No open doors. No explanation. When officials reviewed footage, they saw her walking calmly down the hallway at 2:17 a.m., following someone. Someone too tall to be seen on camera. Panic finally set in. Plans were made to relocate the remaining children to a federal facility. But before transport arrived, a local archivist brought something to the command center. Old census data. Handwritten school attendance logs. Photographs recovered from a shuttered historical society. Every one of the 42 children appeared in the records. Not recently, but over and over again. The same faces. The same ages. The same clothes. Logged every 30 to 40 years. Always in towns that later disappeared. Always followed by fires, floods, or unexplained evacuations. And always one detail written in the margins. Complete. On the final night, the remaining children were found standing together in the parking lot, facing the empty road where the bus had first appeared. They were holding hands. When officers rushed outside, the children looked up in unison. One of them smiled. The sound of an engine echoed in the distance. By morning, the parking lot was empty. No children. No footprints. No bus. Officially, the case was closed as a hoax. Unidentified minors, mishandled records, mass hysteria. Unofficially, agents were told never to reopen the files. Years later, a trooper driving that same highway reported seeing a yellow bus parked on the shoulder just before dawn. The door was open, and inside there were children. More than before. All sitting quietly, waiting to be counted again.